the World Cup 2023.
Welcome to another edition of Extra Time Unlocked. Ikama Samkelo, the sports and cheetah. So today we decided to do things a bit differently. We decided to visit our friends at the Hollywood Bets, Kings Park Stadium. I'm with the Sesli Sharks assistant coach Joe Mongalo, who also happens to be the head coach of the Kerry Cup team. But today we're speaking about the 2023 Rugby World Cup that is currently taking place in France. Maybe, coach, let's just get straight into it. I mean, so much has happened during this Rugby World Cup, but what have you taken so far from the matches that have played?
Thank you very much firstly for having me, and good afternoon or good evening to your guests as well. So for me, I would say it's amazing how the tier 2 nations are competing so well. A team like Fiji, Samoa, those nations, how they are really making a scrap of it, especially when Fiji beat Australia. It's nice when you play a tournament and you don't know who's going to win. You can't predict it. And also Fiji, who had a close loss against Wales. I think that's an interesting thing. I also think it's interesting to see how the guys who are on form, the top nations, are kind of using these first couple of rounds to gain form. You can see a team like South Africa, who's played both their squads, played, you could say, their main team against Scotland, and then they gave a whole new group a chance to play against Romania, and did incredibly well. So I think it's interesting to see how the different coaches are mixing their squads in preparation for the big ramp up when we get to the quarterfinals in a couple of weeks' time.
You speak about Romania. In my humble opinion, that really just looked like a training session to me. But our win against Romania. But what do you think the guys would have learned from that particular match?
I think sometimes those games are difficult to play if you're not disciplined, because it's easy for guys to go off script and try to do their own thing. I think for me it's a compliment to the group about how they stuck to structure. When a team is leading by 50 points and they still kick a contestable kick, it shows you that there's a map that they're trying to play to, and they were disciplined enough to stick to it. So I would actually say it's a good test of character, good test of discipline towards the way a team wants to play. So I think we would have learned that we know how to stay the course, whether it's raining, because you saw it was raining, it was humid, and then also you had opposition, probably not the best opposition at the World Cup, but despite that we were still able to stick to our guns, which I think is a great compliment for the group.
Obviously, a guy like Mongalo during that Romania match, he scores a hat-trick of tries and he's named man of the match. What has been your impression so far of the Sharks boys that are within that Springbok camp?
Yeah, we often like to refer to them as that they're Sharks players who are with the Springboks, in that way, because we want to own them and claim them, because they're so important to us as an organisation, but also important national assets. So I would say obviously up front most of our guys are forwards, so very good to see a dominant Springbok pack, which means that obviously it will help us when those guys return, whenever that will be. And then a guy like Mongalo to get a game after a while, he hasn't had a few, so for him to do so well and still look so sharp says a lot about the way he's training when he's not involved with the group. And obviously when you get guys like that, when they come back, and hopefully they'll have a gold medal around their necks when they come back to us, that they'll bring that enthusiasm, that energy and all that experience that they brought from the World Cup. So we're very happy for them to be in that space, and we're looking forward to learning from them when they get here. A couple of things that they picked up on the international stage that they can help to add value to us here, it's going to be invaluable.
How valuable is that experience though? Say a guy comes back from winning the Boks did in 2019. They come back from that high of winning the Rugby World Cup. What does that do to the team now when you play here locally?
Yeah, I think it's quite a leadership thing, and I think John Plumtree, who's our head coach now, is a great leader. So he'll find a way to help them land, and then also help the group understand what the dynamic will be like, because now you've got an influx of 10 guys who come in. I think we'll be 4 or 5 games into the season then. So obviously there's a lot of group dynamics there that will be done, and I mean the leadership here is good enough in order to do that well. But then more than that, you're getting guys who will be hungry for something different. So you've tasted the best of the best by playing against the best of the best in a World Cup, but there's a sense that we need to create something for them to get excited about, and that's the responsibility of the coaching group, of the current playing group, to make sure when those guys get here, they're on board, but they're looking to say, listen, you guys have got something special going on here, and we want to be a part of that and add value to that mission.
Obviously a big talking point last week and during this week also has been around that hooker position in the Springboks. Obviously losing a guy like Marco Marx, who was a Rugby World Cup winner. He did it with the Springboks in 2019. And obviously we saw the likes of Dion Fourie this past weekend, also Marco van Staden coming within that role. But I was surprised that we did not call up like a recognized hooker in a guy like Joseph Dweba, who has been on the standby list. What do you think about that situation and that whole Andre Pollard coming in, slotting in there when we have a recognized hooker in a guy like Joseph Dweba?
I think good question, very good question. And I would like to say, from the little bit of that I know about Jock and Rassie and that management team, is that they are meticulous in their planning. So whatever decision that they've gone with to bring Andre in and then to go with those other two hookers, it's not on a whim. They didn't wake up that morning and say this. They would have thought ahead of time that this is the plan and they would have prepared for it. You've heard about how Marco van Staden has been throwing in since before they got to the World Cup, and Dion Fourie has been a World Cup winner. So I think for us, from the outside looking in, it may look like a decision that you're thinking about that doesn't make sense. But to people who are involved, and also we understand that every time you bring somebody into a group, the dynamic changes. So those are the kinds of things that those coaches have to think about. They've got to think about both the rugby element, can a guy throw and scrum as a hooker who's already there, and what does it mean to bring somebody different in, and what does that do to the dynamic within the pack. So those are the things that we don't have we're not preview to seeing those things, so therefore it's difficult for us to make a almost informed comment on something like this because we don't know what's going on the inside. And I think also the Andre Pollard thing is, I think it's just somebody who's been there, who's won a World Cup, and I think he's not just another player in the group. He's quite a well-esteemed guy within the group. He's a leader. If you're a flyer, if you kind of lead the organization, you lead the team on the field. So I think he's more than just a player that they're bringing in. They bring in another asset in leadership, in team dynamics as well.
Do you not think also that decision was prompted by, the inconsistency when it comes to goal kicking? Because you know how important that's going to be, especially towards the later end of the tournament where guys need to score those points. Because we saw a bit of inconsistency with Manili box kicking, and then obviously Faf de Klerk can also kick for the post, but I think you do need like a recognized number 10.
I'd answer that twofold. One, I'll say there's more to a fly-off than just goal kicking, and that's why Moni Libbok can wear the 10 jersey for South Africa, because it gives you other things. His speed off the mark is exceptional. His defense, he holds his own. He gets a lot of line speed because he's quick from 0 to 10 meters. His individual ability to beat people. You saw the cross kick look away that he did to give, I think it was Curtly Arendse's try. So he's got so many other massive attributes. That's why he's a Springbok 10. And obviously I think he'll know it's something that he can get better in. He's done it well for the Stormers, so I'll say that's the one side. The other side is, if you do look at Test rugby and you look at when games are won and lost by fine margins, a fly half who's got a 80+%, 90+% makes a difference. Not World Cup history tells you that. Johnny Wilkinson won the World Cup for England in 2003. There was a kicking thing. We got booted out because Stephen Larkham kicked a drop goal in 2000, I think also in 2003. So, and then Stephen Donald kicked an important penalty for New Zealand to win the World Cup, I think in the semi-final first. So you're always going to have somebody to step up and kick potentially a penalty that could win you a final, get you into a final, get you into a semi-final. So I think it's something that we can't overlook, and we'll probably speak a month from now and say a game was won and lost based on a kick or not.
Obviously, at the time of recording, we haven't heard the team announcement yet for Saturday's match. Big one, Springboks against Ireland. But what are you anticipating this time around in our squad selection? I mean, we've made headlines all over the world. It would be the 4 scrum halves. It'd be the 7-1 split. So what are you anticipating this time around against the number 1 ranked team in the world, Ireland?
I think the last time we played Ireland, it was in Dublin, and they just got a narrow win over South Africa. So there's something there.
That it was 1916 or something.
Yes, very close game. So the South Africans will have that in their hearts. We don't forget easily when we lose test matches against nations like that. So I think it's there. The Irish are obviously the one team who on attack will see if they can find ways to get around our defence system. So that's going to be a good battle of attack and defence. I think in the set piece they scored a maul try against us in Dublin, and I know that pack would have definitely not forgotten about it. So the dominance of the two packs is be one factor. I think that's definitely going to be there, who dominates that space, and also if the referee is bold enough, if we're dominating, to give us penalty advantage. Because if the ref gives parity there, we're supposed to give advantage, and he forces us to play on in the scrum or the line out more, then it makes things a bit tighter. But if we get somebody who'll reward us for our dominance, it'll be massive. And then the second part of that is obviously our defence. I don't know when last the team went to 2 World Cup games without conceding a single try or just 3 points. Obviously we're a solid defensive side with Jock Nino as the head coach and the defence coach, but I'm sure the Irish will try 1 or 2 things differently to try and pick us. But I think what might be a big thing is the start. I know it sounds silly, but the first 20 minutes, whoever gets ascendancy and keeps that, because I think chasing a game in those conditions is quite hard. We don't see it on TV, but it's humid. Often it's a bit of wet and it's raining. So when you're chasing a game, your error rate can rise. So I think the team that gets ahead and keeps chipping away at the scoreboard is probably got a likely possibility of carrying the game through.
You speak about the first 20 minutes just before the Rugby World Cup. In our last warm-up match against New Zealand, that thrashing that we gave them, 35-7, we saw the Springboks started in a way that they don't usually start when they come up against the All Blacks. The first 20 minutes there was brutal. So are you saying that we need to adopt the same game plan for this island game?
I think so, and I think even more than game plan, mindset. I think that group is such a confident group. They are so well coached, they are so in the detail, but also they get a fine line between detail and passion. So we are primed for a great start. I mean, I don't think the guys looking at Ireland and then there's, how do I say it? Yes, there's a respect towards them, there's honouring them as another team, but I think they look at them with confidence of, we know if we do what we can do, there's a way that we can be dominant in that first 20 minutes. So I'd like to believe that the belief in that group will be sky high. They'll respect the Irish because they're number 1 team in the world. They've got Johnny Sexton, who's their talisman, who they play around, he's everything to that team. So we know all those attributes about them, but I think when we close the door and that South African team behind closed doors, they should be massively confident about the firepower that they have.
In your opinion, does it matter who we play in the quarterfinals, New Zealand or France?
I would waste probably no energy thinking about that, because whoever you get, quarterfinal, semi-final, final, is going to be a world beater. So whether you get France or New Zealand, pick, which one do you want? Do you want the home team with the home fans, or do you want an all black team, game breakers left, right and centre? When you get through that game, who is it? Is it England? Or, you know what I mean? So every game from now on in is going to be a proper test match. So I don't think you almost take it as it comes.
Yeah, and New Zealand will be hurting, especially. I'm sure they'd be fired up if they were to come up against the Springbok side that really just gave them a humbling defeat and leading up to the World Cup.
Yeah, they say about champions, they've got a short and a long memory. They've got and I say championship people and championship teams, they've got a short memory when things go well, because then they kind of forget that and move on to the next thing, but they've got a very long memory when they get beaten and beaten badly. So those rivalries will definitely not be forgotten, which means those playoffs are going to be fantastic to watch.
I think Pool C for me is also interesting as well, in that Fiji were able to get that win over Australia. Now it throws the group wide open. But how impressed were you with the Fijians and the way they played and to get a win over Australia?
Sure, I'd say incredibly impressed. And why I'll say that is the Fijian nature and the nature of playing the ball rugby is just to throw the ball around and have a go, offload, play possession-based rugby. But the fact that they were willing to go into some kind of a kicking game and play pressure rugby and also get into mauls and so mauling, kicking, so that pressure test match game, the fact that they're almost willing to play side of their natural nature to make sure that they can play in a way that can almost take the strengths away from Australia. Australia's pack is not that physical, not that great, so they went and put pressure on them, and then they also used Australia to play from further out. So I thought both the coaching and the application of that coaching plan was phenomenal.
Yeah, I look forward to Australian games, but what I look forward to the most is probably Eddie Jones's post-match conferences. Is always just going on with the joiners there. But just to finally end, do you genuinely believe that we can defend the Rugby World Cup?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey. Like I can answer that with not a shadow of doubt. I think the only Achilles heels we could find is if we pick up another big injury similar to Malcolm. I think that one is a painful one. It hurts Malcolm's one because everyone knows if you got Malcolm and Bongi, you can play each of them for a half and other goes on. So now it'll be interesting to see what we do up front if Bongi has to push 50, 60, 70 minutes in the upcoming game. So that'll be an interesting thing. So I think that's one could be an Achilles heel. The other one is if we get a ref who doesn't reward us for our dominance. So you spoke about that New Zealand game. I mean, that ref was phenomenal. Every time there was an infringement, he put his hand out for penalty advantage. So I think those two things are the ones that might stop us. But the way we're defending, the solidness of our set piece and the dominance of our set piece. And then more than that, over the last year, I love how Felix Jones and Mzwandile Stick and those guys have added another attacking weapon, which is our counter-attack. So suddenly when you kick to us, because people always say don't give them line-outs because they're going to maul you. Now they kick long to us. Now you've got Kanan, Kurt Lee, Chezi, all those guys who can run back at you. So now we're a counter-attacking threat. So I wouldn't sleep well if I was a defense coach who's coming up against the Springboks because I'm like, they can maul us and play off the set piece. If I kick long against them, they can counter-attack, get into phase D. So I think we're a team that's tough to beat at the moment.
And we see the Springbok team just evolving. If you look at the, people, international media used to say that the Springboks are, predictable in the way we play. Remember in 2019 when we won the World Cup in 2019, it was sort of like South Africa is predictable in the way they play, but the one thing that you couldn't do is stop them. Yes. Even though you know the game plan, but it's hard to stop them. But it appears as though now as we are evolving and trying different things like you're mentioning.
And I think that's a sign of a good team, right? Is that when you at the top of your game, you evolve. You don't wait for people to catch you. So yes, everyone thought we that kick chase, contestable kicks, kick to the maul. Now we've got against, who do we play? New Zealand, where we'd had a play around the front where Malcolm scored, and then went around the back of the line out where Kwacha scored. So now suddenly you're like, are they going to maul me? Are they going to go to the front? Are they going to go to the back? Now we've said in the past, just don't kick out against them. Now you've got fullbacks and wings who can counter-attack. So I think compliment to that coaching group. I think those guys don't get it. I know they get credit, but I don't think people give them enough credit for how detailed and meticulous they go about their work. What we see on the field is not a thing that they thought about yesterday. I think they would have thought about this World Cup 6 years ago. I think Rassi's often said that in those documentaries that they weren't planning to win 2019 per se. It was this World Cup that they were trying to win. So that's 6 years in planning. So I think those guys are phenomenal planners, phenomenal man managers, and good masterpieces of the game. They understand the game quite well.
Are you brave enough to give me a score prediction for Saturday's game?
Well, not brave enough as in the score itself, but we are playing Super Brew at the moment within our mini teams here at the Sharks as part of fun. So I've said the Springboks by 10 points.
Springboks by 10 points. You heard it from the man himself, the assistant coach, Joe Mongalo at the Sharks, also the head coach of the Carrier Cup team. By the way, we are media partners, Gagasi FM and the Sharks, for the Carrier Cup team. I'm sure you've noticed the G logo that you have on your shirts. So it's a pleasure talking to you. And as you heard from the coach himself, he's anticipating a win for the Springboks. And that's where we wrap it. This was another edition of Extra Time Unlocked with myself for Sports Mchita. As I mentioned earlier on, we did things a bit differently, and I'm glad, so hopefully you enjoyed it.
Gagasi FM, behind the box in the 2023 Rugby World Cup. Aibo, yeah.